what do they got to say? And he said, these words came out of his mouth. It's like, you have no right to interfere with our way of life, period. And I'm sitting there like, it's like Twilight Zone. I mean, it went bam. My denial system completely collapsed right there. I mean, it just completely, and I'm staring at him, and he goes, I didn't say that. He said, I didn't say that. They said that. I didn't say that. It wasn't me. And I knew this guy. He was being honest. I could tell. And I said, well, tell them this. And he said, they can hear you. He said, they can see you. They can see everything you're doing. They see you through my eyes. I'd never thought about that before. So here's an entity using his body, his senses to communicate with me. It's a boom. I was so racked out that I couldn't see anybody else that day. I closed shop. I just sat there staring out the window going, like, where is this going? Where is this going? That there is no map for this. This isn't mentioned anywhere in any of the college courses I took. So I'm like, okay, these things are entities. These things are separate entities. They are not any figment of this person's mind. They are individual entities that are in these people, striving to control them.
Let's talk about those entities. I'm curious.
So, I'd start carrying on conversation with them, and they weren't pleasant entities. I even tried the thing where walking them into the light, because what they told me, and this was interesting, because for a period of months I would carry on conversations with them, and then suddenly I got this strong feeling like, you shouldn't be doing this, and I don't know where that came from, but it was like, stop talking to them. But during the months I was talking to them, one of them told me, he said, listen, we're assigned to destroy these people. And if we don't do a good job, or if we're discovered, we're sent to some place called the pit. And apparently it wasn't a very pleasant place. There was one guy who one voice that, I think it was one patient that he told me that, now this was somewhere else, wasn't in the prison, but it was a female whose voice wasn't doing a good job of messing her up. So it was taken away and another one was sent to take its place. Let me see, what else did I learn then? So they were told that there is no light in them. So there seemed to be a hierarchy where there were the worker bees that were, like the voices that were destroying the prisoners. And then there were entities above them that were like their sergeants or commanders or stuff like that. There was one time where we got rid of, I was working with one guy, we got rid of all the voices that he had reported for a long time. We walked them into the light, they were gone. And then all of a sudden another one came up, one that he hadn't reported ever before. And I said, where'd that one come from? And he said, well, that's their supervisor, that's their boss. And I asked him if he had any interest in escaping wherever he was, and no, he was pissed off that he lost a couple of soldiers. So that was interesting. And then where'd it go from there? Oh, okay. I noticed that, time after time, these guys would report that after the voices attacked them, their energy levels went down to nothing. They just had no energy. Some of them said that they could feel their energy leaving their body. They could just feel it being drained. And there was a one-to-one correlation between the voices attacking them and their energy level dropping down to zero. I mean, they were reporting they couldn't even get out of bed for breakfast. They were so drained in the morning after a night of these things attacking them. And they weren't using that energy. They were laying in bed, tossing and turning. Yet they were reporting that they were so weak after being attacked by these voices. They said it was like working with a pickaxe in the hot sun all day. So that's how drained they were. And I'm thinking, well, that's because the voices are constantly negative, calling them, names, telling them they're no good, telling them to kill themselves, all the rotten stuff they say. And it's 24 hours a day that they're prattling at them. So I went, well, that's probably what causes that. And I just assumed that was it. Then I was reading a book by a shaman called Miguel Ruiz, a South American shaman.
Sure.
And he was talking about these entities which drained the energy out of people also through negativity. And I'm like, that looks just like what's going on with the people I'm working with. So I brought that book into the prison, brought that same guy in who told me that his voices said, you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And I told him, I said, listen, I got a couple of paragraphs in this book here I'd like to read to you. I want your opinion on it. Tell me what you think. Because I was always asking them questions.
Right.
What's going on with you? What are the voices saying now? What are they doing now? How did they react to this? What did they do to that? What did they do when you did this? So I'm like, okay, tell me how they react to this. And I started reading that paragraph where it was talking about the energy drain that these things caused.
Right.
And man, he just got, his eyes just went boom, just
Really?
like, like do, just staring at me with this glazed look.
Wow.
And he's stark still. He's not saying anything. He's not moving. And I'm looking at him like, what the frick is going on with him? And then all of a sudden from behind my head, there's this loud crackling. It sounded just like a arc welder, crack, 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 crack. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And it moves from behind my head up the left wall, crackling all the way. And I'm like totally freaked out. I can't see anything. I can't smell anything, but I can hear it crackling as it's moving up the wall.
Wow.
And I look at him and I say, do you hear that? And he says nothing. He's just staring at me with this vacant stare. So I push my chair against the wall because I'm going, he's going to jump me. He's going to attack. And I'm getting ready to kick him back if he comes at me. And this thing, I didn't want to take my attention off him for too long because I didn't know what he was going to do. He was looking really weird. So I'm switching my attention really quickly between the crackling and him. And it goes over his head so I can keep an eye on him while it's doing it. I see absolutely nothing. And then it starts coming down the wall near my left leg, and it goes into this Rubbermaid trash can right next to my leg. And I look down in there and it's completely empty and something is in there crackling, loud crackling, just like an arc welder. And then it suddenly goes dead. And I'm like, what just happened? And I look at him and he's still got this glazed look on his face, and he kind of slowly gets out of the chair and he goes, I gotta leave.
Really?
Yeah, really. And I'm thinking, yeah, get the hell out of here. No one's go, get out of here. It's like, and I'm like totally freaked out. And he shuffles down the hallway and I'm like, get up. And I start looking at the wall to see if there's any burn marks there. I check the other wall, nothing. There's nothing. I go out into the hallway to see if any of the doctors or nurses are in. Nobody's there. All the offices are locked. There's nothing that could account for that noise. And there was nobody I could talk to about it except him. And I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to bring him back. I didn't want to see him for a long time. It took me, I think it was close to 3 months before I got my curiosity overcame my terror of whatever the hell was going on, because it was now affecting physical reality. I mean, I heard it. That was a physical sound. If it could do that, what else could it do? I didn't know. I had no cognitive map for this. There was no book. There was no text. There was no instruction manual. And it was like I was entering this strange psychotic world with no roadmap. And I'm stumbling around in the dark, and all of a sudden I bump into this, and it's like, okay, what else is in there? And I was completely freaked out. And I closed my office and just stared out the window all day. It's like, this is getting really weird. This is really getting weird. And I'm like, what am I getting myself into? But I couldn't stop because I was so curious. It was 3 months later, I called him back. I had the guards bring him to my office, and he sat down. He looked good. I was expecting him to be a wreck. So if whatever it is could do that, I figured it would just tear him to pieces. I was expecting him to be in really bad shape. No, he wasn't. He was in good shape. He looked, he had lots of energy. And I told him, I said, I was expecting you to be a wreck. He's going, oh, no, I'm doing the exercises you said, and I'm able to hold them at bay. They haven't gone away, but I've been able to hold my ground with them. So, I said, have a seat. And I said, do you remember the last time you were in here? He goes, yeah. I said, did you hear that crackling running around my office? He goes, yeah, I heard it. He said, but I'm surprised you did. And I said, what the hell was that? And he said, that was them. I said, them who? He said, the voices. I said, well, what in places were they doing? He said, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did a damn good job of it. I'm like, and I said, you looked really strange when you left my office that day. I said, what were they telling you as you were leaving my office? He said, well, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your belly. And I'm like, oh, he wouldn't have done that. I've been working with this guy for 6 months. He's getting better. He's making progress. He's not near as bad as shape he was in. He wouldn't do that. And I said, well, why didn't you do it? And he said, well, I couldn't find one.
It's a good reason.
And I'm like, what am I getting myself into here? So it was clear that whatever these things were, they didn't like me much. They didn't like me meddling. So after I got over that, I was finding what they were telling me. I was getting some of the stories from some of these prisoners about their relationship with the voices. And it was fascinating. There was one fella who he was hearing voices. He was from San Diego. He had a long criminal record. He was using all kinds of drugs. He was hearing voices. And one day the voices told him, hey, take all your money. We know where there's a sesame pot field up in Oregon. And they told him he had like $230 or something. Then they told him to get 2 burlap sacks and a big knife. And they would show him where this sesame pot field was up in Oregon. And here he is telling me the story, and he goes, well, I got the bags, I got the knife, filled my car with gas, and I headed up to Oregon. He said they were telling me where to go turn by turn, how to get. He said, I got up to Oregon, got on this dirt road, and there was like 26 miles of dirt road. And finally it ran out. It ran out against the mountain. And he said, well, okay, what do I do now? And they said, take your burlap sacks, take your knife. And there's a trail up there to the left. Just go into the woods a little bit. There's a trail. Follow that trail up there, and it'll take you right there. So he did. He walked for maybe an hour and a half, and he comes across this huge marijuana field, just juicy marijuana plants. And he cuts them up, fills both the sacks, takes them back down to his car, and he asks the voices, well, what do I do now? And they said, well, we know a park where you can sell it. And so he goes to that park and he starts selling marijuana, and he's making a lot of money. And I said, well, what'd you do then? He says, I bought all the prostitutes I could deal with. He said, I drank all the alcohol I could handle. I got all the cocaine I could deal with. And then I went fishing. I said, you went fishing? He goes, yeah, the voices wanted to go fishing. And I said, oh, come on, you're pulling my leg. This is getting too. No, he goes, honest to God, the voices wanted to go fishing. I went fishing with him on the Columbia River. He said, I was the only one catching fish that day. He said, they told me where to throw the hook, how long to leave it there, and when to move on. He said, nobody else was catching any fish. I was just pulling them in one out after the other. So he said this went on for about 2 weeks. So he used up those 2 bags. He went up and got another 2 bags, and he's just living the life of Riley. All the drugs he could, all the prostitutes, all the alcohol, all this bad stuff. And then he runs out again. He gets his bags, and he's going to go back up there again. And the voices said, no, don't go. Get your money and head back down to San Diego. He said, they know you were stealing from them. They're up there waiting for you. If you go up there, they're going to kill you. So he turns around with a lot more money than he left with, and he goes back to San Diego. Now, this guy completely recovered. At the time he told me this story, he wasn't hearing any voices. It was he was a very interesting case. He would hear his deceased mother come and talk to him periodically, and I was very suspicious of her because the voices can act like anybody.
Yeah.
They can take the form of anybody, and because they have access to your memory, they know everything you do. So they know what you did. They know, your relationship with people. So I was worried that, one of them would take the form of the mother, because I'd seen him take forms of other people, there were some harrowing stories when they did that. But I asked him, I kept asking him, well, when's the last time you talked to your mother? Oh, the other day. What's she telling you? Yeah, wear clean underwear, stay away from the gangsters. Don't be selling drugs. Go to school, learn your lessons, and stuff mothers would say. So I kept asking her every time I saw him. You heard from mother? Yeah. What's she saying? Well, she's saying stay away from this guy. He's a bad guy. And it was never anything negative, like the voices would say. They were consistently negative. So sounded like his mother. But I was still a little skeptical, but I didn't see her as a threat because she never said anything negative. So when he recovered, the voices vanished, and he was free of them. That night at 3 a.m, after the voices were gone, I got crushed down into my bed. I mean, there was something crushing me into the bed, and I was terrified. I couldn't see anything.
What do you mean? So that day he told you that night he told you he recovered. You saw him that day.
That day he told me the voices were gone.
Right. Okay.
They were no longer around. He said he felt totally different. He could feel that they were out of his mind. They were out of his influence, and he was totally normal.
So you went home and went to bed.
I went home that night, 3 o'clock in the morning. Boom, being crushed down into the bed. Every single time a prisoner totally recovered. That happened. That happened like 4 or 5 times. And it was like, what is going on here? What? It was terrifying. I mean, I was absolutely terrified.
Were you awake? Or were you sleeping when it happened? Or
well, I was asleep when it started, and then I woke up and I could still feel it. I mean, something was pushing my whole body down into the bed. I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything, but boy, I could feel it. I was being crushed down into the bed, and started praying like, and finally it left. But something wasn't happy. Something wasn't happy.
How long were the episodes for you?
Oh, they weren't very long. It was 20 seconds, long enough to terrify me, long enough to know that it was happening. It wasn't just a brief thing that just flittered by. I mean, it was happening. Let me see what other tale.
So you were still working in the prisons at this time or was this private practice? Yeah.
No, I was working at the prison, so well, I could get a lot of information out of these guys. There's one fella. He told me that the voices were telling him which houses to rob and when to rob them,
Hmm.
where he could get in, and generally where the loot was. And he said they were great. They told me all this stuff. They told me when the people in the house were up, so I could get out. And I said, well, if they were that great, what are you doing here? What are you doing locked up? And he said, well, I got greedy. There's this one really rich house that I knew there was a bunch of stuff there, and they told me not to hit that house, and I did, and they caught me. But he was telling me that when he got out of the house, the voices there was one time where they told him that the occupant of the house was up, that he needed to get out, and that the cops were coming. So he jumps out the window and he starts running down this alley to his left. And they said, no, don't go down there. The cops are coming up that alley. Go the other way. And he goes the other way and he sees this dumpster. They told him, get in the dumpster and stay in the dumpster. So he jumps into the dumpster. One of the cops comes by with a flashlight with his gun drawn. And the guy was maybe 10 feet away when the voices said, okay, now get up out of the dumpster and run. And he's going, no, they're too close. He said, do it. The voices are saying, do it now. So he quietly gets out of the dumpster, gets out and runs, and gets back to his apartment. And the voices are saying, good job. And he said, well, not so good a job. I left all the loot in the dumpster. And they said, well, you go back and get it in the morning. And I'm like, that was one. The meth, the guys who were using meth, the voices would tell them when they ran out of meth, it would tell them where to be, when to be there, to meet somebody who would have it. And time after time, they would go there. And these are several different, different inmates. They'd go there and somebody would show up with the meth.
Did the guy go back to the dumpster for his loot?
Yeah, he went back to the dumpster and got his loot, so he was happy, had all that stolen money, got away with it again.
Sounds like selling their soul to the devils for cheap advice, let's say.
Well, they got drugs, they got prostitutes, they got all this bad stuff that was eventually destroying them. It wasn't good for them. They would often end up in jail or prison time after time after time. But they were having a good time while they were out there.
So this was all while you were in the practice with the prisons and hearing about the voice.
This was at the prison. And so, these things were draining their energy. But they didn't realize it. I started asking them, where does your energy go? Where does your energy go? And they didn't know. They were aware that their energy was gone after the voices had attacked them, but they thought it was from rolling around at night all night. They didn't think of it, And then I'd ask them, well, where'd your energy go? You didn't use it, So, well, the most common answer was, I don't know. But I saw this was happening. And like I said, I thought it was due to the voices telling them bad stuff 24 hours a day. They're not being able to sleep well. And I just thought I chalked it up to anxiety. I didn't know that they were being drained to start with. Then one day I got a call from, I was over the jail for the entire prison. So the worst of the worst went to this jail. And they were locked up with another cellmate. There are two of them in this cell. And it was a maximum security jail. So the worst of the worst went there. I got they called it an inmate kite from one of the prisoners in there who was saying, hey, my cellmate's crazy. He's standing there at 3 a.m. and he's staring down at me. He's talking to whatever. He's talking, carrying on conversations with something. He's pacing the floor all night, and I'm afraid of him. I can't sleep. That same day, I got another call from the captain of that facility saying, "Come on over here. You need to do something with this psychotic guy in there." So I go over there, and I pull the guy who the non-psychotic guy, the cell guy where his cellmate was staring at him at 3 a.m. And I have him pulled out of his cell, bring him into the interview room, and watching him as he goes up the steps. And he's got plenty of energy. He just kind of bounds up the steps and kind of walks over quick, sits down. He's very anxious, but he's completely coherent. He's got lots of energy. He's not slumped down in his chair. He's terrified because he was sent there for one. He snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood, the gangsters in the prison, and he snitched off one of their drug deals. So they lost all their drugs, and they had half their gang moved to other prisons all over the state. So they were pissed. They wanted him dead. They'd already stabbed him once. He was there for protective custody.
This was the guy that was being stared down upon.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So they wanted him dead so bad that they actually got in trouble so they could get sent to this maximum security place so they could get at him. And there were some of them in there, and they were sending notes under his door saying, "You're dead. As soon as we get, we're here. We're waiting on you. First chance we get, you're a dead man." And they're putting these notes under his door. So he knows they're out there. They'd already stabbed him once. And now he's got this psychotic guy locked in this little cell with him, pacing the floor, talking to who knows what, acting like a lunatic, and staring at him at 3 a.m, just standing there looking down at him. He wakes up and sees this guy staring at him. So you couldn't be under too much more stress than that, unless you were at war. I mean, so I finish up with him, and then I call the crazy guy out. And I watch him. He's not on any drugs. He's floridly psychotic. He's hearing voices to the max. And he just kind of scraggles up the steps. He's got no energy. He's very slow. He's hanging onto the handrail. He's pulling himself up the steps. He slowly comes over to the office. He sits down. He kind of slouches in the chair. He's got no energy. He's drained. He's totally drained. And, talk to him. And when I'm finished, I'm like, it isn't the anxiety. I walk out of there, I'm going, it's not the anxiety. So what is going on? Where's the energy going? Here I have scores of schizophrenics saying when their voice is attacked, their energy is gone. So I'm like, well, then where's it going? And there was a 1-to-1 correlation between the voices showing up and their energy being drained. So that's what I was wondering when I went over to when I brought that one guy in with, Miguel Ruiz's thing, talking about the parasites, the entities being parasites. And then I started questioning them about that. I kept asking all these new prisoners, well, your energy is drained. Every time the voices show up, your energy is gone. Where do you think it's going? The most prevalent response was, I don't know. But some of them would say they take it. So when I went to work in the ERs, after what they did is, as these guys started recovering, word got out that I was spending 2 or 3 hours talking to some of them in my office, where the average psych staff couldn't deal with them for 20 minutes. They didn't know what to do with them. They didn't know anything about the voices. The prisoners weren't telling them anything because they didn't trust them. So it'd be like, oh, how you doing? You're staying on your meds. You're doing okay. Yeah, the voice is under control. Yeah, no, okay, go, fine. They weren't going to hurt anybody. They weren't crazy, out of control, and they just let them go. Stay on your meds. We'll see you next month. And I was trying to find out what's going on with the voices.
Mm-hmm.
When these guys started recovering, word got back to the chief psychologist because they went off their meds. They didn't want to take those meds anymore, and they were normal. So something was going on, and I know I couldn't tell them anything about it. I couldn't tell them anything about what the voices were or how they behaved or anything I was doing, because I'd be in trouble immediately. I know it. I knew it. So I didn't tell them anything. So they started talking to some of the guys I was working with. They pulled one guy in who had, his voices were gone. He went off his meds. He's back to normal. He's back again. No more voices. So he went off his meds, and psychiatry got suspicious about that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the chief psychologist had another psychologist come and start talking, trying to find out from these guys what was going on. And they wouldn't tell them anything. They knew what they were up to. They wouldn't tell them anything. So they asked this one guy who'd fully recovered, what we were doing in our sessions. And he basically said, he's helping us, not like you, asshole. that was, he could have gone all day without doing that. That set him off. So he said, the psychologist who was over there doing the questioning said, we have a MMPI profile on you from when you came into prison. Would you be willing to take another one?
What's an MMPI profile?
Well, it's their gold standard personality test for psychologists.
So they're talking about you taking it or the patient?
No, the patient taking it. So they already had one on him.
Right.
It's the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's the most studied, the most valid testing instrument that psychology has. It's up there with their Rorschach and stuff like that. So it has all these scales, and one of the scales is a psychotic scale. So he was off the psychotic scale when he came into prison. So this investigating psychologist said, would you be willing to take another one? He said, yeah, sure. So he takes another one. They score it up and it's valid, and it's showing he's no longer psychotic. So they know something is going on now, and now they're scared. I thought they would be happy that these guys were recovering. They were pacing around like demons. It was like, what's going on? We got to get this under control. He's doing something in there we don't know about. We're going to get in trouble. I mean, they just got extremely paranoid for some reason. And they just made life tougher and tougher and tougher.
Sounds like the monsters were working both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I think they were. I think they were. So they finally made it so miserable that I was within reach of retiring, and finally I just took leave, burned up all my leave time, and then just said, okay, screw you, I'm going, and got out of there. But
so you found you were helping them, in other words, the patients, with what you were doing.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, this wasn't supposed to happen.
Well, how were you helping them, if you could say, like in a short bit?
Well, you're breaking up those patterns.
Gotcha.
So when you have a pattern like that, you do the opposite.
Okay.
So the 23rd Psalm was still on the list, but that's a lie program. So what these things would do is what they were after was that negative emotional energy. That's what they were draining. That's what they were feeding on. So they would fill their minds with all kinds of crap. It didn't matter whether it was true or not. Most of it was lies, just complete lies. So I'd point out to them, listen, you can't trust these things. I mean, how many times have you got in trouble listening to them? You can't trust them. They fill your head with lies they get you all upset and then they drain you. You know, so there was one gal I was working with, Sherry Sweeney. I was working with her on prison reform, and I couldn't attack my own prison system because I'd be in trouble. But she was attacking the Alabama prison system because her husband had been framed and he was locked up in there. So I was helping her with that. And I knew her for 10 years. We worked together on prison reform for 10 years. Until one day I was talking to her one night about a strange psychotic prisoner I was working with, and telling her about what the voices were telling him. And she goes, "Oh yeah, I know all about that." I'm like, "What do you mean you know all about that?" I mean, she's one of the most spiritually advanced people I've ever met. And here she is telling me all she know all about that. I'm like, how could this be? You know, so right away I started pummeling her with questions that nobody who wasn't psychotic could answer. Yeah. So I'm like, blah, blah, blah. And what do the voices do here? And what are they? And how does it? And she's like, bam, 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 right down the line. And I'm just sitting there like, whoa, you know, in 10 years, she hadn't mentioned anything like that to me. Yeah. So we started talking about the voices, and she said, they're liars. They lie about everything. She said, I just would use this. I would just say every time they come, I'd say, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. And she said, eventually they weakened and would leave as long as she didn't believe what they were saying. And I said, well, geez, try that. Let's try that. So that was one of the things we used. The That's a Lie program. That's on my site. She wrote it up. It's on the website. At jerrymarzinsky.com. So that's free to anybody who wants to put it to use. It's all written up there, how to use it, what it is, how it works. But what they do is they sound just like, for the most part, they sound just like your regular thoughts. You know, all the thoughts that you have running through your head every day, except their intent is very much different. You know, so, you know, there's one preacher I talked to who said, yeah, there's one time I was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon. I was looking down, and he said, all of a sudden I heard jump in his head. I said, that was them. You know, a bunch of people would tell me, like, they're driving. They said they're hearing the voice say, "Hey, turn into the traffic, turn into the oncoming traffic," stuff like that. They hit us all. They hit us all to varying degrees. I mean,
Sure.
I remember one time I was out there. Here in Arizona, we don't have much grass. You go out there with a machete and you cut down the cactus to keep it from overrunning you. And I was out there with a machete, and I have a beautiful husky, pure white husky, and she runs by, and here's this thought barges into my head: chop her head off. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, and even though I would never do anything like that, I would never think anything like that on my own. It was upsetting. You know, so that's them. That's them. They have complete access to your memory. They can pull up any rotten thing you've ever done, throw it in your face, and just keep rubbing it and rubbing it and rubbing it until they create that negative emotional energy that they feed on, and then they drain you. So they're parasites. They're energetic parasites. And they hit us all.
For sure. I hear those voices too. I hear them all the time. I mean, I laugh at them now. That's my way of dealing with them.
Oh, they hate that.
You know,
they hate being laughed at. They hate being mocked. They hate being ignored. So I remember in the state hospital, there was one time where I was sitting in, and this is before I knew hardly anything about the voices. I was sitting in with a psychiatrist and a patient. And the psychiatrist was talking to the patient, said, okay, I prescribed these drugs for you. And the patient was saying, well, yeah, I've been taking them, but the voices are still there. So, you know, for the most part, the drugs don't get rid of them. They just weaken them. So the psychiatrist says, well, just ignore them. And I'm like, well, I wonder how that works. So 2 weeks after he said that, I called that patient back into my office and I said, Hey, remember when Dr. Mendez told you to ignore your voices? Just, ignore what they're saying. I said, how'd that work? He said it didn't. He said they got louder. He said they got worse. They will not be ignored. So I went, that's odd. So I started asking all the other schizophrenics, hey, what happens when you ignore your voices? Consistent response. They get louder. They all get louder. They won't be ignored. So I went, that's interesting. So it's talking to these people. I mean, psychiatrists don't talk to them. They bring them in, you hear them voices. Oh yeah, take these drugs, boom, and you're out. There was nobody curious about the voices. They'd all been brainwashed by the ivory tower to believe that they were hallucinations. So why would you investigate a hallucination? Why would you investigate something that you already thought you knew what it was? Anybody who's investigating a hallucination, you'd think they're kind of whacked out. So here's hundreds of staff at this hospital, none of them that I saw curious about the voices or what the voices were telling these people, when it was pretty clear that the voices were to some degree driving their behavior. And that's what drives paranoid schizophrenia. It's the voices. It's not any chemical brain imbalance.
For sure. I would agree. The mind monsters.
The mind monsters.
Yeah.
So they're out there. They hit us all.
Or in there.
Yeah, they're in there.
I would agree. I mean, it's amazing that you've had this journey of so many years through so many systems, through their system back to, so now you're in private practice.
I'm in private practice now, working with, I got nobody who can tell me not what to do. So, I mean, I even dropped my license with the state and told them to shove it. So I'm working with stuff that they can't even conceive of. They have no idea. It's a whole different world. They can take their traditional psychotherapy that doesn't do anything, and they can shove it.
I would agree.
So there's a new system that came out, which is very interesting. It's called the MACE energy method.
Okay.
It was pieced together by this brilliant genius who was a merchant marine ship captain. And he was widely read. So he would just piece things together himself. And he would read philosophy and psychology and all this stuff. And he's kind of trying to piece together how the human mind works. And see, one of the things that psychology and psychiatry to this day do not take into account is that we are spiritual beings. If your spirit leaves you, you're gone, you're dead. They will not take that into account. They totally ignore it. But what Mace put together was a spiritual component in his psychotherapy, where the spirit is actually helping find buried traumas that these things feed off of. So if you look at, you study schizophrenics and you go, well, what is it in their background that they all have in common? And one thing they all have in common is trauma. There's severe physical, psychiatric, psychological, and emotional abuse in virtually all their backgrounds. Very severe trauma, and usually multiple traumas. Except for maybe the ones that are using meth. I've seen more prisoners go crazy on meth and stay that way than any other drug.
I guess you're giving themselves trauma.
Well, what that stuff does, it opens up the spiritual energetic field and just invites them in. I remember when meth started coming in and prisoners started coming in because of the behavior of going crazy on meth. They were being locked up and they were seeing something called the shadow people. I hadn't heard about the shadow people hardly at all. So these were three-dimensional shadows that would show up while they were high on meth. They never spoke. They usually didn't have eyes. And if they did have eyes, their eyes were lime green or red, not good color for eyes. But they never reported hurting anybody. I mean, not one prisoner ever reported they were hurt by them. I had one gal who reported that she could feel them walk through her. They never seemed to possess anybody. They just seemed to be watching and frightening, scaring people. And what the prisoners would say was that when they noticed them, when they saw them, they would start moving toward them. It's like they were aware that somebody could see them. So that was another strange phenomenon that was happening. So I started investigating that. And, it was the schizophrenics would see them also, but not as much as the people who were abusing meth. So, then I realized that the ones who saw the eyes were in much worse shape than the other ones, the people who didn't see the eyes. So I was using that as a diagnostic tool for a while. And in the ER, they'd come in, well, did you see the eyes? Yeah, I saw the eyes. Okay, okay, this guy's in worse shape than the average guy. But while in the prison, I ran into one prisoner who said, well, I went to experiment one day with my buddy. We wanted to know whether we were both seeing the same shadow person or not. And that immediately got my attention. Nobody I knew had ever experimented with these things. What they told me is if they saw them it was like whatever these things were, they were three-dimensional dark shadows, would start moving toward them. And none of them ever hung around long enough to find out what would happen when they got there. They all took off. So this guy was particularly interesting. So I started questioning him. I said, well, what'd you do to experiment with this? And he said, well, I got my buddy. We wanted to know whether we were both seeing the same ones or not, or whether they were individual, because we were seeing them for sure. So they drove off to the Sells Indian Reservation in the middle of nowhere in the desert. They both brought amphetamine needles that they were going to inject up with. And first one of them shot up with the meth and gave it a few minutes. And then he started seeing the shadow people in the desert around. Then he would talk to his friend who didn't shoot up and said, hey, I see one over there near the cactus. You see that one over there? No, I don't see it. Well, how about the other one over there near the rock? No, I don't see anything over there either. So they did that long enough to figure out that, okay, they needed the meth to see these things. So the second guy shot up, and then they started comparing notes. You see the one over there near the tree? Yeah, I see him. Well, what's he doing? Well, he's just standing there. How about the one over da-da-da? And they were both seeing the same ones. So they realized that, but by the time they had compared notes, they were surrounded by them. So here's this whole circle of these shadow beings out there in the middle of the desert, and they're closing in on these two guys. So they freak out, they jump in the truck and lock the doors, and they're watching from inside of the truck. And all of a sudden, the guy said that the back of the truck went down like somebody dropped a giant boulder in there and the front jerked up. And that got my attention. That's like, that is a physical effect. And I'm like, what is going on there? And he said that the whole back of the pickup truck was full of these shadow people. And I asked him, well, what'd you do? And he said, well, we stepped on it and we got out of there. And he said, we almost wrecked the truck getting out of there. And I said, did they follow you? And he said, no, they didn't. So I don't know what these things are. I mean, the schizophrenics see them, the meth addicts see them. I've seen them out of the corner of my eye.
Yeah, I see them too. The Toltecs call them the shadow people, or the shadows, right? The people.
Yeah. So I don't know what they were. The closest I came to an encounter with what might have been one was one day I was working in the emergency room doing psych crisis at the county hospital. And it was Christmas Eve. I got drawn for have to work Christmas Eve. So it was pretty quiet that night. But there was one guy came in and they sent him back to the psych annex. And I took a look at him as they brought him back, and he's shaking like a leaf. He's just all over. He's just shaking like a leaf, and he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop quivering. So, brought him back and started talking to him. He'd been using a lot of meth. And I said, well, how long you been using meth? He said, well, I've been injecting for 10 years. And I'm like,
Crazy.
He should have been dead 5 years ago. I didn't know anybody who survived 5 years of shooting meth.
So 5 years, he should have been dead, you say?
Yeah, he should have been dead. Here he is sitting in front of me, shaking like a leaf. He couldn't stop shaking. The whole time he's in there, from the time he walked in till even after, when I was talking to him, he's shaking. So I asked him, well, you seen the shadow people? And they go, yeah, I see the shadow people. I see them all the time. And I said, have you ever seen their eyes? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, what color are they? And lime green. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And then just something, told me, said, ask him if he's ever talked to them, because they don't talk. They've never spoken to anybody. And, I've spoken to scores of patients who've seen them. They've never spoken to anybody.
The shadow people.
The shadow people. They're just quiet. They stand there and they watch. They're darker than the rest of the room. They walk through walls. You turn on the light and they disappear. They're gone. And it's not just three-dimensional humanoid type shadows, although that's what most of them are. Some of them wear hats, believe it or not. They have hats and cloaks and all, it's like crazy stuff. And some of them are like, they're not even humanoid shaped. They're like creatures of some kind, darker than the rest of the room, but they're always darker than the rest of the room at night. So I asked this guy, have you ever spoken to him? And he goes, oh yeah. And I'm like shocked, because he's the only one of scores of meth addicts who had reported that he'd spoken to them. And I said, what do they sound like? And he mimicked this high-pitched squeal that reminded me of like scraping your fingers on a blackboard. I mean, it was just him imitating it, kind of like, yeah, like that.
Right.
And, and I asked him, like, well, what did they tell you? And right after I asked that question, his all of a sudden he stopped shaking. He went stark still. And his eyes just got black. I mean, his pupils just opened wide black. And he's staring at me, and it wasn't him anymore. That wasn't the guy I was talking to. There was something else looking at me, and it was eerie. But one thing I've learned, you can't show fear. It's like running from a dog. So here I am staring at whatever this is. And his eyes were like these deep, dark pools of just cold hatred. I mean, it just seemed to go down forever. It's just hatred. And the feeling I got was like, I'd rather slit your gut open, spill your guts all over the floor than say another word to you, is what I was feeling coming from this thing. And I'm like, what is going on here? And we're just had this staring contest. So I'm staring at it. It's staring at me. And I'm like, I don't know how much longer I can take this. And then boom, flashes back. His eyes turn back to normal and he starts shaking again. So whatever it was didn't like me asking that question. And I'm like, but I had to know. I had to know. So I asked him again. I said, well, what did they tell you? And he said, they told me to go jump in front of a truck and that I would be okay. So I said, well, what'd you do? He said, well, I went out to the road and I jumped in front of the truck. He said, I got hit. I got knocked off the road, off to the side of the road. And he said, when I came to, I was laying on the ground and all the shadow people were surrounding me. They were standing around looking down at me. And I said, well, then what happened? He said that they told me to get up. They said I wasn't hurt. And I said, well, what happened then? He said, I got up and I wasn't hurt. And I said, well, then what happened? He said that they told me to go do it again. So he went and did it again. He got hit again. And then there they were standing over him saying, get up, you're not hurt. I said, were you hurt? And he goes, no, I wasn't hurt. And then I went to ask him another question and boom, the eyes went black again. Here it was back again. Here I'm staring this thing down for a second time. And I'm like, oh my God. It seemed like forever. It just seemed like forever. And I was just, and here's these black pools of hatred. I've never experienced anything like that in my life before. I've experienced mad patients, angry patients, out of control patients, but nothing like this. Just this cold, still darkness with these dark pupils just staring at me. And you could feel the hatred welling up from it. And I'm like, oh, geez, god damn. So that went on for about 15, 20 seconds, but it seemed like forever. It seemed like it would never end. And after that bout, I went, okay, get out of here. I'm done. Go. You're going in. You're going in. So he goes out and the psych nurse tries to talk to him and she comes running in 2 minutes later going, I can't deal with this guy. I can't deal with this guy. Well, what'd you get? What'd you get? I need to write a report. Let me get your stuff. So I'm like, I don't know what that was. I don't know what that was, but it wasn't anything good.
So what are you doing with all this? Like, this whole history of what you figured out, what's come to you, the stories, your literal experiences with the monsters in the shadows and how they eat people.
Well, what I did do is write this book with Sherry Sweeney, Amazing Journey Through the Psychotic Mind, which is how we got there. So you could get it on Amazon, get it on Lulu, the publisher. But yeah, it's a story how we came about to believe that the voices were actual entities and not hallucinations as a psychiatric mafia. You look at how they have that sewed up. You cannot, if you wanted to investigate the voices, you could not get into one of these institutions to do it. No. They would not let you into a mental health center. They would not let you into a psychiatric hospital. They would not let you into a prison. They would not give you access to these people. I never in my entire career at the prison, 18 years or so, I never saw a single researcher in there. At the state hospital, I never saw a single researcher researching schizophrenia, ever. In the mental health centers, never. Only in the academic institutions. And then you look at what they're doing and you got all this statistical garbage that nobody can understand who hasn't been trained in that stuff. And then they draw these conclusions. So they got it tied up. You can't see it for yourself. So and what I'm hoping is that the people who work in this field, I mean, what I'm getting is, psych nurses are writing me and saying, I always suspected it. But I just needed somebody to, kind of push me over. That reminds me of one psych nurse, and this was at a private psychiatric hospital I was working at the time. The patients got together and they were going to do an exorcism on this one patient who was hearing voices. So the nurse knew about it and she goes, well, there's no harm in that. Let them do it. So here they were doing this exorcism and I don't know whatever came out of it, but they found out that the nurse was aware of it. Psychiatry found out that the nurse was aware of it and she didn't stop it. And they almost fired her. They reacted so vehemently that it was just incredible. It was like, they put her on suspension or something like that. I mean, they took it very serious that they don't want anybody dicking with this stuff. They don't want anybody showing that it's not hallucinations and that their medications are not the only way to treat this.
Sure.
So, now I've started a private practice because, Sherry talked me into it because all these people are writing like, what do I do here? And how do I do this? And how do I deal with that? But what I needed was that second piece. So with everything I had learned previously and with this MACE energy method, they lock together, and I mean, it's, you can get rid of the trauma. We're getting rid of the voices, and people are recovering. So it's working with people who are, not severe, moderate, but the serious prolonged ones, they're gone. Like you can't touch them. They're too far gone. Plus you got the brain damage due to the years of antipsychotic drugs. So, but some of the people that I couldn't reach normally, when they're on the drugs, I can reach them. So there's a good probability that if they work hard, we can get them off of those drugs and get them normal again.
Mm.
So there is another way to deal with schizophrenia other than poisoning these people, locking them down and treating them like aliens from some other planet.
This has been fascinating. So maybe we'll change the topic to mind monsters and schizophrenia as something that people can look at and figure out. And it's interesting that they have a method, an option, or a path that could work instead of
what they did. These people in Australia who have this, what do they call it? It's like their own university for this particular therapy. They took it to psychiatrists and they took it to the universities and showed them how well it worked. And the university said, oh, well, we won't pay any attention to it unless we can own it. They took it to the government, showed them it worked, and they just blew it off. So it's ridiculous. I mean, this works. Where regular psychotherapy, for the most part, you're just going over the same stuff over and over and over. It's like you're reliving the trauma again and again and again. Each time you do it, it makes it wider, and bigger. This stuff goes in there. You can get to the trauma. You can discreate it, and then it's not a factor anymore. So it's amazing stuff. When I saw it, I was just fascinated.
Well, perhaps the monsters don't want their food source messed with.
No, and that, matter of fact, when I'm working with some of that stuff, the voices jump in there and they try to interfere.
For sure.
They cause, oh, I got a headache now, or my head is splitting, or I got it, or this one guy last week, he went over like he was throwing up, he was gagging, and then there was this diabolical laugh, like, ha, 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 ha. I'm like, whoa. So yeah, there is a way to cure schizophrenia. It doesn't work with everybody, but it works. It works with a lot. I mean, that's much better than what psychiatry is doing. Those medications they're using cause horrible damage to the brain, and they cure nothing. They don't want to cure. They want to just keep dishing out these expensive meds. It's ridiculous what they're doing. I mean, it verges on fraud. You look at what they're charging for those drugs. They didn't put any money into much into research for those drugs. They were discovered by accident. So it wasn't like they were powering in a laboratory for years and years and years. It cost close to $1,000 to stay sane with those drugs, buying them from the pharmacy.
What, per month?
Yeah, per month. Yeah. You can go across the border to Mexico here, and you can get the same drugs with Mexican labels from the same company for like $70.
I'm not
$75.
I'm not surprised.
And over the counter. You look at what psychiatrists do. These drugs are not abusable drugs. Antipsychotic drugs, nobody wants to take them. Nobody in their right mind wants to take them, and nobody in their wrong mind wants to take them. Nobody wants to take them. They are awful drugs. They have terrible side effects. They are damaging. They're poison. They're toxic. And here they are dishing them out like candy and insisting that there is no other treatment and putting down anybody who comes up with one. So what they're doing is unconscionable. It's and they keep control of those things. It's like nobody wants to take them. Why should they make them just only a psychiatrist can order these particular drugs? Even the regular doctor won't do it because this is the province of these specialists, the high priests of psychiatry. It's like, in Mexico, somebody who's having hearing voices, he can walk into the pharmacy, buy them himself if he wants to take them. They're not abusable. Why should they have to go through a friggin' psychiatrist to get these drugs? They prescribe them once, they work. If they work, then he can walk into the pharmacy and get it himself. No, the psychiatrists want their cut of it. So here they are screaming about the medical cost in the United States. It's the biggest fraudulent scheme there is. It's this merry-go-round of fleecing these people who can least afford to pay for it. They go psychotic, they bring them into the hospital, they either charge the state or the county or their insurance, they put them back on those meds, they release them from the hospital after they say they're stabilized, they stay out for a few months, they go off those meds again because they can't stand them, they go crazy again, they bring them back in, and the whole process starts over and over again, each time fleecing these people of like $10,000 or the state or the county, and then they wonder why medical costs are out of control.
Wow.
These people are doing nothing. They're curing nothing. They don't want to cure anything because they can keep dishing out these drugs over and over and over endlessly, and nobody's getting better.
And the monsters keep eating.
Yep. And the monsters keep eating. So all they're doing is suppressing the psychotic symptoms. They're suppressing the psychotic process with these drugs. It's like compressing a spring, and holding it down with these drugs, and it's doing damage while it's doing that. But then when it springs up, man, it just blows. It blows again, and then they don't know what else to do with them, so they force them to take these medications.
Gary, I'm delighted we have someone that can help people. So let's say,
well, not all people.
Well, no. Well, let's say someone is listening and needs some help, what would you suggest to them, as we leave this video, to reach out and how they can?
The first thing I'd suggest they do is go to my website and start watching some of the videos. There's the That's a Lie program is under the articles section.
Okay.
JerryMarzinsky.com. It's MARZINSKY. Get that program, the That's a Lie program, and put it to use immediately. It will weaken the voices with consistent use, because if they're not believed, if they're telling the patient all the lies, and the guy has to figure out what's his voice and what the voices are, because in a lot of cases they sound the same, and in some cases they don't. You can tell the difference right away. Okay, this doesn't belong to me. Like the one that told me, "Oh, cut the head off your dog." I knew that wasn't anything to do with me. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't want anything to do with anything like that. So that wasn't me. So the way to intent is tell the difference is the intent of the thought. Is it a negative thought about yourself or somebody else? Any negative thought about yourself or somebody else comes from them, comes from the dark side, because we are pure spiritual beings inside, and all this other stuff doesn't belong to us.
I hear you, and I agree. Well, it's a good way to say, and it's a good way to leave it. I think, I'm going to get this up. I may break it up into two halves, one half for people to get to the beginning of what you said, and then you get really to the solutions, at the end of this conversation. You get deep into, the monsters, the psychotic breaks, and what could possibly help them to get beyond that, which is very helpful. I know I've had my share of interactions with people that seem beyond the kind of help I can give them when they're asking for advice, and they sound a bit crazy, for lack of a better way to put it. So I'm delighted to be able to point your way and what you've shared here, and give them another leg up on what's possible for healing themselves.
Yeah, great. And I do have some people who are willing to, who have been in that state and are willing to share what that was like. What we can do is now the one fella who is really passionate about letting people know that these things are entities and are not hallucinations. He's working as a mechanical engineer now. He only can do interviews on weekends. So if you want, we can schedule something somewhere, September, October.
For sure. Engineering
With
entities
him.
sounds like a very good topic to discuss with him. I would be delighted to do that. And the other person you mentioned as well, the mother of the
Oh,
psychotics,
yeah.
the psychotic challenger. So, we can do case studies, so to speak, I guess, with both of these
Well,
individuals in a way.
all these things you see behind me, they're all cases.
Yeah.
I keep saying, well, I got to write these up. I got to turn these into a book. But yeah, we could even do that. I mean, I got, what was strange when I was doing this was that I was taking notes when I was working with these guys who were cooperating with me, with the really interesting guys. And what was really odd is that I could remember virtually everything that was said during the entire session, line by line by line, as long as I wrote it down within 24 hours of the time of the session. And I can't do that with anything else in my entire life. I can't even remember where I put my glasses half the time or where my shoes are. But, this was so odd that I could do that. So I got all these transcripts that we can go through those too. So you can actually see what the interaction was like and what they were saying and what they were saying about their voices. And
well, I would be delighted. I'm going to break this up into two parts so people can follow it, and then we can do some case studies. And, part of the work we do here at the New Now and the newagora.ca, if anybody wants to check out what we've been sharing for, at least a dozen years, is all about how you can help yourself to a better life. And part of it is getting control of your inner world, getting control of those psychic voices, getting control of the mind parasites or the mind monsters, as I've called this particular chat we've had here. And if Jerry can help, and some of the other case studies can help you guys to understand that you're not alone. Other people have gone through this challenge, and there's a way out. There's a way to help yourself. That is amazing, and something I'd be delighted to be a part of, and to do further chats with you, Jerry, on that. That would be an honor.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to get to the point where they understand that these are not hallucinations. These are actually parasitic entities that do not want to be discovered.
I hear you. Well, they've been discovered. We're going to help expose them some more. You're not the only one I've talked to that have come to this conclusion and have seen what's going on. So, I have a happiness, let's say, and a delightful opportunity to be able to share in bringing this to light and bringing this to the forefront and allowing people to heal themselves as they decide that they can help themselves. And this and what you've shared is another amazing step and some great tools. The books you mentioned, I will leave all the links below. I've talked with Sherry. Anybody may want to check out the chat I've done with her. She shares tons of articles on our website as well from Keyhole Journeys, so check those out. I'll be sharing more information from Jerry. He's mentioned that he's doing some writing related to this before we get on the chat today. We're going to be sharing some of that along the way. And, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a delight. I hope to chat with you again soon. If anybody has any questions, any suggestions, anywhere they want to go, leave the information below. When we post this, I'll be happy to share the information with Jerry and allow him to get back to you as he can and sees fit as well.
Okay, send me the links when you get them up.
I will. Thank you so much, Jerry. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon. I love you all very much. Thank you for joining us here, and we hope this helps.
Adios.
Can't make me lie to my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Freedom first is what I say. Nothing now gonna get in my way.